Thank you very much, Darren, and panelists who are here sharing their wisdom and experience, volunteering to do that to help us better our community. Let's give them a hand one more time, please. I'll tell you what, with all that knowledge and all that gray hair on Darren's chin, you wouldn't believe that he was only 2 years ahead of me at James Island High School, but that's really all it was. Well, I want to thank you all for being here. I'm Brian Duffy. I'm the chairman of the Charleston Forum Committee. We are happy to have you back for a second year. And there are some other people I need to thank as well. Quickly, we'll get, really appreciate Mike Bennett and Charles and Nicholas at the Music Hall hosting us here again. I want to thank Amanda Loveday and Megan and Taylor and everybody at MP Strategy who really makes this happen. And they are the ones responsible for the misprint in the program that says we're ending at 9:30. So you can blame them for that. But on that note, we know that good conversations and good solutions take a while to get to in a discussion. So what we're doing right now is Megan with MP Strategy, former reporter, is interviewing all of the panelists to get their solutions and having those on video that we're putting on our online forum at charlestonforum.com. So the conversation isn't over, it's continuing, and we're continuing to get their ideas for solutions. Other people really I'd like to thank. Please check your program and see who's on this committee. They're the ones that put in the work throughout the year to make this happen. The sponsors who are supporting us, again, are the way we're able to do this. Other special thanks to Mayor Tecklenburg and Mike Wack from the city who have continued to make this a priority for the city, as well as Reverend Manning and Reverend Nelson at Mother Emanuel who have, again, continued to welcome us into their family. So thank them all. We really appreciate your support. And we are now going to turn to our topic of education. And on the education panel, we are pleased to have Cindy Ambrose, who's the Deputy Superintendent of Charleston County School District, Faith Rivers James. Come on out, Cindy. Faith Rivers James, who is the Assistant Provost for Leadership at the Citadel. We have John Reed, who is the CEO of the Cradle to Career Collaborative. Welcome, John. Thank you. And we have Alana Simmons, who is a former teacher and creator of Hate Won't Win, the organization she created after the Mother Emanuel massacre, which was very personal to her. Welcome, Alana. And finally, we are glad to welcome Elliot Smalley, who is here with us as the Superintendent of South Carolina's Charter School District. Welcome, Elliot. And I have another friend as a moderator, a good friend I know to be a great lawyer, and some people tell me he does okay moonlighting on TV too. So, Bakari Sellers.
Hey, man. What's up?
Thank you very much.
So we're going to hop into it because I have dinner reservations at Hall's in a little while, and I know many of you all want to be able to go through and have a great evening. You know, one of the things that I want to do is begin by saying I'm from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, where we don't have lights this bright. But in Denmark, we have 3 stoplights and a blinking light. And my mom and dad would always say that the 2 most important words in the English language are the words thank you, because they're not nearly said enough. And so before I begin, I not only want to say thank you to this illustrious panel, and as much as I pontificated from the well of the South Carolina State House about public education and the education system in South Carolina, these individuals know way more about it than I do. I want to say thank you to Brian Duffy and Amanda Loveday. Amanda's amazing husband, John, is out there somewhere. John, stand up. Where are you, John? Okay, he's somewhere in here. He gives me all of my, there he is, he stood up. He gives me all my advice when we're talking about making sure we can educate kids in the best way. Isaac Williams is in here as well. And I just want to say thank you. And, you know, one of the most amazing things is that I have an awesome opportunity. You know, when I think about 1947, not far away from here, I think about Briggs v. Elliot. And I think about the parents of young African-American children who simply wanted their kids to be able to ride school buses to school. And so they filed this case, which was the landmark case in Brown versus the Board of Education. That's the history that I come from, and every day I'm on CNN, every day that I'm on TV or able to talk to young people, I carry that history with me. And I want to say thank you to a lot of those people who were on the panel before. I even want to say a special thank you in the spirit of my good friend who passed away, which is why we're here, Clemente Pinckney, to Paris Denard, who came down this long way to be with us today, and everyone who was on the panel before. Give them a special round of applause as well. So that's my spiel. When I'm running for Congress or something one day later, it will be much longer. Trust me. And so with that, I'll start right here to my right and just keep going. Give us a brief introduction. We're going to be a little bit quicker. I'm going to do my best Anderson Cooper, Don Lemon impersonation. But please, just tell us about the state of our education system in South Carolina. But I want you to answer two questions. Where we are today, and where do we go from here?
For me to start talking about where we are today, I want to share a little bit about myself. I have ties to the Charleston community. My father was a welder, and I lived here until I was about 4 years old. He was injured, and we moved to a rural part of South Carolina, and I grew up there on a farm. So I learned a lot about hard work, but we always had an affinity for Charleston. So when you think about where we are today and where we go tomorrow, we have come a long way, but we have to acknowledge we have a long, long way to still go. Much work to be done.
Good evening. I'm Faith Rivers James, and I'm pleased to be here at the Citadel, where I'm the Assistant Provost for Leadership. I'm a native of Mount Pleasant, Charleston County, product of these schools, and have a lot of ideas about the state of education from my own experience, but also from a policy standpoint. And I look forward to talking tonight about where we are, because a lot of that depends on where we've been and where we've come from. And so Bakari started the ball rolling with Briggs versus Elliot, and I think tonight we'll talk a little bit more about some of that history.
Thank you.
Well, where we are and where we've been in our work, which is as broad as from birth to workforce readiness, has set the table for what we have. And what we have is essentially a failed system, a system that does precisely what it was designed to do, but it is antiquated, fragmented, batch processing, driven by an agrarian calendar, and designed as if all children were middle class, white, and learned in the same way.
Amen. Preach a little bit.
Good evening, my name is Alana Simmons. I'm a former educator. I was certified to teach K-12, and I've even taught a little bit further up to about 65. I think that was my oldest student. But anyway, I think that the state of education is essentially in the state of emergency. We have a lot of work to do, not just as teachers and policymakers and different things like that, but parents and students and community stakeholders as well. And as far as where we're going, I believe that if we go as a community, we can take the education system, particularly the public education system, where it needs to be.
My name is Elliot Smalley. I would lead with the fact that I'm a dad. I have 3 kids actually in public schools here in Charleston, and so I think very powerfully about wanting all kids to have the same access to great schools that my own kids have. And I would just respectfully disagree with the notion that we've come a long way. I think for people who look like me, we have, and for African American students, we haven't. And I think that I'd go back to before Briggs versus Elliot, and I would say that in many ways the educational attainment of African American students mirrors what it looked like 200 years ago, even though we have different sophisticated measures now. And I would leave you with a statistic, which is that actually if you're white in Charleston County, you do far better than white students in South Carolina. So our proficiency rates here are actually much higher than all the other counties combined. But if you're an African American student in Charleston County, you actually do far worse than African American students in the plaintiff districts and in all of South Carolina. 7 out of 10 white third graders can read on grade level here. 2 out of 10 African American third graders can read on grade level here in our proud county of Charleston, in our crown jewel city of Charleston. And so I'm encouraged to have a discussion about what we need to do about that. And we need to be frank about the fact that race matters. Dylan Roof didn't go into Emmanuel AME because of poverty. He went in there because of race.
Well, I mean, that's So why aren't kids ready for kindergarten? Well, I mean, when we talk about ages 0 to 5 and many of the systemic failures, John, I know this is something that you want to piggyback on, but why don't we have kids who are ready from the cradle to when they get to the point where they're entering our education system?
Well, if you characterize K-12 as systems failure, as we would, 0 to 5 is systems less. It's a balkanized desert of support, particularly for families in the 3 counties here that need from before birth through birth and the sort of referral and diagnostics that advise early what the needs of a child are. None of that is available here, and so they will fall off the radar screen. 3K is virtually non-existent. 4K preschool is hard to come by. And so the fact that so many kids come to kindergarten unready from early phonics, numeracy, and socially and emotionally is no surprise given what our community has to offer.
Alana, we just talked about briefly, from cradle to entrance into kindergarten, but you like to talk about standardized testing.
Sure. Just to kind of
I didn't even ask the question yet. I mean, how you jump
Oh,
in before I asked the question?
I thought you were just gonna let me go.
This
Okay,
was
go
I
ahead.
actually had the question written down. This
Okay.
is decently
Got it,
profound.
Mr.
Okay.
Moderator.
So, as a former teacher, you know that learning isn't standardized, and we aren't trying to develop standardized teaching. Yes, yet the teaching is standardized. So what can you say is the impact on standardized teaching as the way that young people matriculate through our education system?
Sure. So as an educator,
There we go. See, that was a natural segue.
we understand that people learn differently. We have visual learners, we have tactile learners, we have audio learners. And so everyone learns differently. And as someone who hires people, nobody wants to hire the standard person. Everybody wants a creative and innovative mind. But we spend lots of money and lots of time standardizing our kids. But then when they go out into the world, we tell them to be the exact opposite of what we're grooming them to be. And so I am a very biased advocate for lowering standardized testing when it comes to kids because they all learn differently. And it's the same with teaching. When I taught, I think I took 4 standardized tests to get my certification to teach, whereas if I were to run for office, all I would need was the filing fee.
Slow down, chill out.
All I'm saying is that we
Stay
put
in
a
your
lot of
lane.
emphasis. We put a lot of emphasis on standardized testing, and it's essentially not fair. It was put in place to keep Black people out of classrooms in the first place. And so, if we are going to continue to put that emphasis on it and put that money into it and put that time into it, we're not going to see that disparities gap close.
Elliot.
Yes.
All right. So you always talk about the need to embrace the impossible and unfamiliar in order to create, a long-standing change in course, for example. And race is a powerful factor in how the people as a whole treat schools and schools treat students. I graduated from Orangeburg Wilkinson High School, which was at one point the largest predominantly Black high school in the entire state. We suffered from overcrowding. You had teachers who pushed around carts because we didn't have enough space in classrooms. Tell me what in South Carolina, I don't want to get to an ist because we always have the most or the ist, but if you could kind of pinpoint some of the things we're not doing right and some of the things that are easiest to change, what would those be?
I like how you ended that. So just focusing on a few things that we know we're not doing right and that are easy to change. And so, I actually went to a predominantly Black high school in South Baton Rouge, McKinley High, and I had to go to high school a 5th year just to graduate because I became part of that school's culture. And I sort of just easily succumbed to a low standard of expectation in my high school. And it had a dramatic effect on me, and it had a dramatic effect on my brother. And so I've seen personally how the unit of school, that schooling experience, no matter what your life circumstances, can have a huge impact on you. And what I would say, Bakari, is we have a different set of expectations for Black students than we have for white students. And that powerfully translates into what we give them access to in the classroom. We give a certain set of students access to something that's very inspiring and rigorous and reflects a high expectation, grade level text, argumentative reasoning, the kinds of things that you do on CNN every day. But if you walk into some classrooms in predominantly black schools here in Charleston all throughout our state, and I see it because I work in a statewide district, but I would put the schools that are struggling here up against any school in South Carolina, you see a totally different expectation that is brought to kids every single day. You see a much lower expectation. You see an expectation that says, we're okay with where you are, and we'll meet you where we are, but we won't actually push you to get higher. And so I would say one of the most fundamental things that we could do right now, so I agree we have too much testing, but I think a standard of expectation and a high standard and a progression to that standard for every single student, every single minute is the key, and that could dramatically change things.
Now, Cindy, he was talking about the fact that we simply don't have a high level of expectation for people of color in this state and in these schools. You deal with this every single day, and I will tell everyone under the sound of my voice that what you all do in this school district is better than most. In fact, it's in South Carolina, it's damn near excellent. So what are you all doing that's different? If I could take something that you all are doing here, because I don't have all the resources in Bamberg County. I really don't. I don't have kids with iPads in every school. I don't have the ability to have, all of these new facilities and this and that. But what's the je ne sais quoi? That's French, y'all. What's the je ne sais quoi y'all have in the Charleston School District, which makes you all tick just that much more?
So I want to talk about where we're headed in regards to where we are. Where we're headed, we just wrapped up, you heard Mayor Tecklenburg talk about the diversity and inclusion study from Clemson University. That report should come out in the next 30 days, and in that report will be a set of recommendations for us to use as a compass for strategies we need to put in place. We're also building out 3 primary strategies to really look at how we propel Charleston forward. The first strategy is readiness. Readiness for early learning, we talked about that. Readiness in reading and math and science. Science is really important if America's going to hold its place as a world power in the scientific community. And then readiness for what comes next in your educational endeavors, whether it's a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, a graduate degree, whether it's going straight to work, making sure that students are ready. Then it's talent development. Looking at the leaders in our schools, are they equipped with the skills they need to progress monitor every student in that school and making sure they're on the trajectory to be successful? And then teachers, supporting our teachers, strong leaders, strong teachers. And then the third thing is equity. Looking at what we offer in Charleston, looking at defining a program of studies that we can equalize.
Can I ask you a question? Mm-hmm. Why equity and not equality? I know the answer, but share with them.
It's equity and it's access. It's equity and opportunity to make sure that our students have the same opportunities, no matter if they're in a rural school with 79 students, and we do have that in Charleston, or whether they're in a school with 1,100 students. What offerings do they have access to? What higher level courses if you're in a high school of 300 kids, or if you're in a high school of 4,000 kids? What dual enrollment opportunities? What AP opportunities? So those are our 3 primary strategies: talent development, equity, and readiness.
Do y'all all understand the difference between equity and inequality? Everybody get that? Yes?
I
no?
can explain that, Bakari.
Go. That's why you're here.
If you look at there's a little cute visual we use in Charleston County School District.
You use the fence?
We use the fence.
All right, imagine everybody a fence. Now go.
Okay. Let's say that we are standing side by side trying to look over a fence that's 6 feet tall. We don't need the same size box.
We don't need the same size box, correct.
That's right.
So I'm gonna dig a little deeper so they can get it, okay?
Thank you.
So if we have a fence that's 6 feet tall, and we're talking about equality, that means we will all have the same box, right? But if I'm 6'5", which I am, and she's 5'8", that means she will still not be able to peer over the fence. That's why you don't necessarily need equality. But equity would make sure that she could see over the fence, even though she needs a slightly bigger box. Everybody get all of that? Good.
Nicely done.
Thank you. Now, Faith, I'm saving the best for last. You're written about in the book of James because it says faith without works is dead. This is gonna the crowd's gonna moan slightly, but one of my best friends when I was matriculating through the State House of Representatives was a young man named Mark Sanford. Mark was my governor, and Mark would always invite me over to the house, to his governor's mansion, and Mark would always talk about, I swear he always would talk about Friedman. It was like the only book he ever read. It probably was, but he'd say Friedman. And he would always say that the world is flat. And when you read Friedman, when you talk about it, you're like, the world is flat, because now kids who graduate in Charleston, they're not just competing with kids who graduate in Columbia, in Washington, D.C., in New York. They're competing with kids who graduate in Indonesia, in Abu Dhabi, around the world, because due to our interconnectivity, fundamentally the world is flat. In your job every single day, how do we make sure that young people in this area, especially young black people in this area, can compete in a global economy?
Well, thank you. It is really important for us to recognize that the competition isn't just the next county for economic development. It's not just the next state for regional development. It is the entire world. And so if we are going to prepare our kids for that global competition and maintain our national status at the top of that competition, we have to let some things go. And so if we are going to focus on achievement for young people, it's not just compared to a low expectation. It's not just compared to where we were last week or the district over. It is, what do we need to do not to provide a minimally adequate education, but an excellent education that will help our students compete.
How do we do it? Give me some ideas.
How do we do it? Well, for starters, if we look at where we are, we have an inordinate number of students who are in the same situation that I was in when I started at Janie Moore Elementary School. Everybody in the classroom looked like me. There was no opportunity to learn from others, to share other cultures and appreciate diversity. And here we are from 1970 to 2018, and too many of our kids have that same experience. If they're going to compete nationally and internationally, they need to know what the rest of the world looks like. And they need those higher standards.
You know, John, the funny thing is, when in Denmark, my dad used to always pay for the summer camp. And it was the Denmark Recreation Center. And you know what the highlight of that summer camp was? We would go to Kerwins. And don't be laughing at our experiences in Denmark. I heard y'all chuckling. But many of the kids, you know, my colleagues, I would travel a little bit, but not a whole lot. We go to like Memphis or DC as a child, but they had never left South Carolina. And so the number one experience they had at Kerwins was, you know, where you can put one foot in North Carolina and one foot in South Carolina? We spent more time taking pictures there than we did riding the rides, because they wanted to be out of the state. If you were governor of South Carolina, John, tell me a few things you would do to change our education system today. You didn't think I was asking that one, did you?
I just was still stuck back in
Denmark.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful city. I'll take you down. We have a wee bakery.
between-
It's a long story.
Well, I think to understand public education for what it is in this state is to see it from a business standpoint as the talent supply chain that fuels economic growth. And anybody who's lived in a supply chain knows that every link counts. And in this state, the weakest link is 0 to 5.
Explain, but let's back up. You said supply side chain. I understand that. But let's break it down. I mean, you're talking to a room full of voters. What does that mean?
That means universal 3K and 4K preschool. That means a program that provides a home visit and a nurse, providing referrals and diagnosis for every mother, all 9,000 births in the Tri-County region, at their option.
And so to push back, what if I'm from the upstate and I'm somebody like my friend Lee Bright running for Congress, and I say, why would I do that? What's the ROI? Tell me why this is valuable. Why am I going to spend tax dollars on your poor child in Charleston?
Well, I was going to take you on a little bit on the sort of the equity, equality thing because there's so much about equity that is by definition unequal. And one of the things about it is that the funding flow for education should go south and into 0 to 5 and the early grades because the ROI on that investment is much greater and the cost of educating much less in the upper grades. The best teachers, the best principals should go in the most challenging schools, and it's now upside down in that respect. And I commend the Charleston County School District for beginning to reverse that process with incentives for getting those best teachers there. So if I were a governor, which is what I think you asked, by influence or by legislation, I would try to be what Richard Riley was to this state, and that is the education governor.
I want Alana to chime in just briefly. Give me some tangible ideas. I mean, we in South Carolina, we are kind of beaten with our problems and our issues. We can tell you what's wrong with South Carolina. I mean, there are people in this room right now who can tell you every school along the corridor of shame, but oftentimes we get frustrated with ideas about how to change it. So you've been in the classroom. Tell us from the classroom perspective as a teacher, what could I do to make your life easier?
Fund the budget.
Well, I mean,
I guess to start with, I know that when I was teaching, every school district would give the teachers, set amount of money at the beginning of the year, and I did the math on the way down here. It equaled out to about 16 cents per student for the entire year. So funding the budget is really important to be able to say that we are a state that values education, valuing the teachers. Teachers are underpaid. I had to get a whole another job. Like, I'm a realtor now. I really miss education, but I had to get another job to be able to survive as a teacher, and nobody goes into education for money. We all know that in college, that if we're going to go into education, that we're not going to make a whole lot of money. We go in because we love the students, and we go in because we love education, and we want to make the system better. But we need to live too, and so one way of valuing teachers is increasing their pay. And earlier I talked about my bias towards standardized testing. They make it really hard for teachers to teach. I took 4 standardized tests, and I'm not a good test taker. I took 4 standardized tests to get a certification. My Virginia realtor license transferred like that. My teaching license, not at all. And I have 2 degrees in education. And so when we talk about, okay, we need teachers, we need people who care about the kids, we need all these things, but then we make them jump through all these hoops to be able to even get to the classroom, it's kind of like we don't really need you, and we really just kind of need you to be a placeholder. Like, we'll take a substitute over a actual teacher. And just things like that, I think would, reversing some of those things and coming up with better practices would improve public education.
One of the glaring questions we have in the room is, both Cindy and Elliot, how do you all work together? I mean, tell me how you all bridge this public charter school. I don't know if that's a question I'm necessarily supposed to ask, but how do you all bridge the charter school, public school divide, and how do you all work together?
Sure. We work at it. It's a work in progress. With full candor, it's interesting because I was administrator in Charleston for 4.5 years. I mean, I did that for a long time right here, worked right with the superintendent here in Charleston, then moved to Tennessee and worked with charters that were 98+% African American and high poverty in Memphis and Nashville, and then came back and saw a different charter sector here in South Carolina. We have white flight charters, we have inequitable charters, we have some great charters too, but we have a lot of access and equity issues in our sector that I'm working to address because I think that's important. And I think one of the keys to districts, traditional districts, I'll say, and charter folks working together is to actually try to put aside the political debates and say, what does a quality public school look like that's fully accessible to all students and gets results with all students? Let's not define greatness by all white schools getting high test scores. Let's say, do you grow all kids in your building? And are you serving all students? And we have some schools that aren't doing that, and we're attacking that. And so I think kind of being agnostic to school type, but more saying, hey, Charleston Development Academy, which is a charter school here in downtown Charleston, right across from Burke High School, Their third grade proficiency rate, which is their third grade is 100% African American, is 52%. It's 52%. That is close, that's above the district average for all students. At Sanders Clyde, another downtown school, it is 1.6%. So fewer than 1 in 50 students, third grade students at Sanders Clyde can read and write on grade level. Let me rephrase that. We're taught by the adults and given access to the curriculum and resources necessary to teach them to read. They can read, but they haven't been taught to read. And so we have some charters that are serving all kids and doing great things. And I think the more we can kind of put aside our political arguments about what type school is best, I say if the district is running traditional schools that outperform the other schools, they should run every single school. There should be no need for charter schools. I think that choice is a really important right for parents to have, but we want to make sure that we're not creating a choice system that only gives choice to the same people who already had choice, who have access to great schools, which is people like me, who can buy my house in a neighborhood where I have a great public school that my kids can walk to.
So I'll push back slightly before we, I grew up in Denmark. So my choices were, Denmark Oler, Bamberg Earhart, Edisto, or Hunter Kennard Tyler. All of those schools performed at average, or actually one of those schools performed at average, the rest performed at below average. And so many times you have these parents, and the question is, what is their choice? And so I came up with this very catchy political phrase, Thomas Dixon, when you're running, you can always say you want to make sure every school is a good choice while we're talking about school choice. But Cindy, we've been talking about, in your position, maybe not as much, but one of the things we've always pushed back on was making sure that our public school system was uplifted. What do you want to see your elected officials do more of to support? Not just, you don't have to talk about your school board members because some of them may be in here, but let's talk about Columbia. What do you want to see them do more of? And you could address them as well.
Yeah, so I'd like to go back to the question you asked
Sure.
originally. So I've worked in 3 districts in 2 states. I've seen great charters. I've seen poorly run charters.
Me too.
The thing that I'm really committed to is that charters, we have charters, but we have to improve our traditional schools, our community schools as well.
Amen.
So now can you ask me that other question again?
I forgot what it was. No, I'm
Elected
just
officials.
What do you want them to do more of to support you?
So we need to focus. We need to unite and link arms. I think this is a great start this evening to have so many different community or facets of the community represented. But we need to link arms, get serious, support our teachers, say thank you to our teachers, provide professional learning opportunities for teachers. Our teachers in the United States by Wednesday have taught more hours than teachers teach for the full week in Japan and other foreign countries. We give our teachers very little planning time.
Let me just admit that I spoke to about 200 teachers in a Facebook group, and I told them they needed to walk out.
They have a demanding job with very little preparation and planning.
And they need to demand more from us.
Nicely said.
Listen, if there are is anybody a teacher in here? Raise your hand. Listen, you do not get anything by remaining quiet and picking up your lunchbox and leaving at 4 o'clock. If you all want what's deservedly yours, look at what's happening in Wisconsin, Arizona, Maryland, and around the country. And if you don't show up, we don't. I know you don't want to hear this, but if you don't show up, we don't run.
I'm fine with hearing it.
So let me ask you a question, Faith. Are we preparing kids for college? You're at the Citadel.
I am at
And you are at one of the more premier institutions in the United States of America. And are we preparing kids in South Carolina for college and the next level? But more importantly, are we preparing black kids for college?
Well, let me start with the first one. Are
Okay.
preparing all the kids for college. And before I came to the Citadel, I was at Elon Law School. And I think at every level of education, the professors are saying something is different. Something is different about the preparation that students bring. And so, obviously, standardized tests adds a different goalpost at the end of the field. So teachers have to teach to the test to get the kids to the right colleges and then to graduate school. But do they have the critical thinking skills? Do they have the problem-solving skills? And those are the things that they're going to need in those creative job opportunities. So I focused a good deal of my time on teaching leadership, teaching students to become problem solvers, to add on to that suite of skills that they are good citizens in addition to being career and college ready. Are we preparing our black students for college? I think one of our challenges is to look at the disparities. When we have such a huge achievement gap, of course there are students who are doing well regardless of race, but too many of our students who are students of color are not excelling. Too many of our students are in schools where the returning teachers, 1 in 3, don't come back. Right? Too many of our students are in schools that are still considered racially identifiable. And so the question becomes, what do we do differently to teach them? Now, Charleston County, we've come up with wonderful strategies. We have magnet schools, we have partial magnets, we have district magnets, we have charter schools. But the challenge becomes when you are in the neighborhood school, because you don't have a choice, because you don't have transportation or economic opportunity from work to get your kids to school, is that a good choice? And so I think our conundrum is to figure out what we do to make sure that every choice is a good choice, regardless of the composition of the neighborhood. The neighborhoods were designed to be like they are. And so if you go to a neighborhood school, that may mean that no one else looks differently than you. So what do we do to support the teachers in those schools? What do we do to support learning when the teachers don't reflect the community? What do we do to make sure that all the teachers have high expectations? I'm a third-generation teacher. My grandmother taught in a 1- and 2-room schoolhouse for 42 years. My mother taught for almost 40 years. They had very high expectations of all their students. And the question becomes, what does it take to get that same level of engagement for students coming in today? Students are different than they were then, but teachers sometimes are different too. So are we preparing them? Our achievement gap says we're not doing the best that we could.
We're gonna answer these rapid fire because we got to get off the stage and I have to make dinner. Start first, Elliot. You look like you had a response.
I mean, there's a report put out by the Education Oversight Committee last year that showed that 6% of African American ACT test takers were college ready, 6% in our state. The ACT average at North Charleston.
Say that one. You from New York or something? You were talking real fast.
No, I'm actually from Charleston, believe it or not.
Slow down.
I took your cue. 6%, if I remember, it was single digits of African American ACT test takers, so seniors in our state. For the first time, we required all kids to take it, all seniors to take it. And it really uncovered some brutal truths about how we're educating whole groups of kids based on their skin color. Because it turned out that, only 6% of students who were supposed to be college ready or entering the workforce, we have this economic panel ahead of us talking about all these opportunities, with STEAM and all these other skills. Well, we've got kids who are barely literate, who haven't been taught the vocabulary to have conversations, who can't read or write, and they're in our high schools. And that is not their fault, that is our fault. That is 100% an adult issue. And it is, I can't imagine if 6% of Boeing's planes could take off. You know what I'm saying? We allow 6% of black seniors to not be college ready on the ACT. Or we allow 98% of third graders at Sanders Clyde to not meet standard in reading. And to me, that's just unacceptable. We need to be urgent about changing that with the leaders that we select to be in front of our kids, the teachers we select to be in front of our kids, and the content and curriculum that we put in front of them every day.
Cindy, how are we doing that, and how in Charleston County are we rebutting all those statistics?
I'm not going to rebut the statistics.
No. How are we fighting against that trend, though?
I can talk about that. So we are getting really intentional about curriculum. Curriculum and instructional strategies, the quality of the instruction going on in every classroom, that's really the lens for equity. Professional learning, undergirding all of that work with lots of professional learning opportunities. But students need access to high quality curriculum, and when you have scores like we have, and I need to say, I joined Charleston in July of last year. So I've been here almost a year, it's almost my 1-year anniversary. We've done a lot of deep dive into the data. So I'm not going to refute those statistics, but I will say we have a plan, and we're going to stick to the plan with a laser-like focus.
Alana, we got about 30 seconds with you. Tell me what we can do. I mean, okay, you could take a minute, but don't take like a minute and a half, okay? Tell me what we can do from a teacher's perspective right now. You know, we're talking about these statistics. We talked about expectations. I want people to take tangible solutions.
One of the things that I wished that would happen the most when I was in the classroom is that I could get more parental involvement. It was one thing that
How do
would
you
make...
let's back up though. I mean, you have let's say I'm a
Yeah.
single parent. I mean, I work 2 jobs. I mean,
I'm so glad you said that. It's immediately tied to...
That was a lead-in.
Yes, it's immediately tied to the panel that just was here. I had a lot of single parents who could not make it to the PTA meetings, who could not, you know, help their kids with their homework, who couldn't do all those things, especially in those pre-K ages that were critical to them being successful through K-12 education. And so, but what I do know, I'm not a mother, but what I do know is that a lot of parents have that instinct that when their child is in trouble, they find a way and they make a way. And if we could have that same kind of value when it comes to education, where I'm going to make a way for my child to have a quality education, whether the state legislators and the superintendents do their job or not, my child is going to get a good education no matter what I have to do. If parents can take on that kind of mindset when it comes to education, I definitely think that that would help when it comes to showing up to those school board meetings and demanding that your child has an equitable education. It will help when it comes to showing up to the polls and making sure that your child has a legislator that values education. And so a lot of times it does come back to the parent. We can have a perfect education system, but if our children are being raised on rocky foundations, it's always going to be an uphill battle. So making sure that our parents value education just as much as we do sitting here on this panel would definitely be something that I would consider beneficial to education.
That sounds like a little personal conversation we got to just have with the family. We need to get a church and have it. How many of you all have been to a school board meeting in the last year? Raise your hand. And don't lie. Oh, that's a good number. We have a few people who are active. Better yet, how many of y'all have not been to a school board meeting in the last year? Raise your hand. Okay, we got a lot of work to do out there. John, you stand in the gap. That's what we call it in the church, standing in the gap. You feel, y'all know what that means when you stand in the gap, when people aren't necessarily meeting the needs of the community, you're standing there where others are not. How can some of these individuals out here stand in the gap and help you in your efforts? And not only that, what other efforts need to be met?
Well, if you believe, as we do, that the system is failing to educate too many of our children, then I think we should be clear on who is responsible for that, who owns it. And it's not the people inside the system. They are as much the victims of it, the educators who are working heroically to educate kids and the children and their parents. The owners of the system are us. They are the business, civic, faith, and community leaders who are, at the moment, largely silent about the failures of this system. So, this is infrastructure for this community. This is what...
John, let me interrupt you real quick. We've been talking about a failed system since I was born in 1984.
Yeah.
I learned about the Corridor of Shame in 1991. I think Bud Ferrillo he had the documentary in 1998. How do we now, we're talking about the same failures. What do we need to do differently?
There are no silver bullets to a system that is as layered and complex as this one is. We have to accept the fact that this is going to take an assault across the continuum from early childhood to post-secondary completion, and it's going to have to be the alignment of the owners of this system that sustain a long-term slog to get the system fixed. And if you ask what the starting block is, it's assuring that every school in the 4 districts here, and certainly Charleston County, has a world-class principal as an instructional leader, leading highly qualified teachers, setting high expectations for kids. You start with that.
Did everybody?
and
Now
build out.
That actually sounded extremely tangible. But the only way that happens is that everybody who raised their hand about not being at a school board meeting in the past year actually shows up to work. My last question is for you, Faith. I got to end with you. And so we've had ideas. I mean, we need a highly qualified principal leading a highly qualified group of teachers. We know that starts with all of these people who have raised their hands and have not been to the school board meetings to press upon their school district officials to make sure that that happens. And you're in a college setting every single day. So my question for you is, how do we take a kid who grows up in Charleston, right here, who's 4 years old, who's out there, who makes the amazing little flowers that we see every single day, who's selling us flowers in front of the Charleston place and everywhere else? I mean, how do we make sure that they can achieve the American dream?
We all have to accept that that little child is our child. We have to become invested in not just the system, but in our community. When we came together with Hands Over the Cooper River, we showed the world that we could come together over a river of hate and build a community. That is the same crisis that our kids are facing today. And whether you send your kids to a charter school or the magnet school or a private school, we as a community can't move forward until we've educated the least of these. And so if we see that child with the sweetgrass flower as our child, we would do our best. Whether we go to the meetings at the school district, whether we fund them through our organizations and business, this is about leadership. We have to lead, and everyone in this room and everyone who's a part of Charleston can lead, because you can influence other people to invest in the educational system, whether you have a child in it or not.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll wrap up where I began, which is to simply by saying thank you. And I hope that you heard some solutions tonight. And even more importantly, they're probably solutions you already knew, but it emboldens you to go out and do just that much more. And so we'll wrap up by saying my name is Bakari Sellers, and this is an amazing event every single year in honor of 9 people who gave their lives so that we could have discussions like this without the angst or the animus, but just bringing together not only Charleston, but the state of South Carolina. It's not only what we were or who we are, but it's about who we can be. Thank you, and God bless you all.